We're here at the spring show today in 2023. We've been sold out a month in advance. Half the people in this room will be under the age of 40, and the other half will be old farts like me.
There's a thin line between a hobby and an obsession. In Winnipeg, you'll find a huge cross-section of people salvaging, repairing, and collecting vintage stereo equipment. There are others who design and build their own gear from the ground up. Whether driven by nostalgia, a love of music, or passion for industrial design, you don't need deep pockets to experience sonic bliss at home.
When you first come to a record show, the first thing that comes to mind is community. There's a lot of people have an interest in vinyl. It's not just an object, it's part of people's lives. And that attaches to, of course, to family, to friends, and stories that people want to share.
You've got the dyed-in-the-wool collectors who are the people that will pay the early admission to get in here. At last show, there was a gentleman walking out, and not a word of a lie, he had probably 1.5 feet of records. He says, "This is my third load." He says, "I'm replacing the collection I had as a teenager."
People will tell you how they came about having that record, and that story gives it even more value. And it's not like a dollar sign value, it's a value in terms of its place in the world, in that person's life.
For me, I'm looking for really a lot of cool Beatles stuff, numbered white albums or different colored editions, Japanese pressings, that kind of sort of stuff. Mine's definitely a family affair. My mom, both of my siblings, we all collect vinyl, so we're at the point where we're looking for like the really cool stuff, the collector's items.
Sometimes it's connecting with the right person. So what are you looking for? And then you see that person next time and go, wait a second, I think I have something you might be interested in. Building relationships is really important in when you're collecting music. Over time, you see that music's changing hands and changing generations, one generation to the next.
I would say the thing that I notice the most is the younger generation that is starting to buy records, which is really cool. If someone asks, what kind of music is this? I took my phone and went on YouTube and I played her a little sample of the music and she bought the record. Trying to make them feel like they're the only one at the table at that time.
Well, I have her around, so it makes me feel
I think this is my 4th convention. Sometimes it is intimidating. There's a lot of people who are a lot wider than you and they take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
You just kind of have to be like, excuse me.
Like, kind of just shove your way in there a little.
Yeah. If I'm here to get the cool stuff, I gotta get my way in.
Exactly. Just can't be afraid to fight for it.
Exactly.
You know, when Dark Side of the Moon was released, I was there. When, you know, Band on the One Run was released, I was there, you know. I mean, we lived through that whole era of waiting for the next Led Zeppelin album. Alice Cooper's School's Out. Remember that album? Do you remember it came with paper panties? Folds open like a school desk. So you open up the top and you open the bottom and it makes it there. And then there's a pair of panties inside. So I got it with the panties and they're quite rare with the original paper panties. There is an illness. We have a friend that he wouldn't replace his tire in his car, but he's got like a $400 Rush box set he just bought.
Analog sound doesn't have to be perfect. Some listeners embrace vinyl just to experience small imperfections that are part of a unique sonic signature.
I started collecting thrift stuff when I was young because I lived in small towns and it's so cheap there and it's not picked over. Vintage clothes, records, furniture, knickknacks, all that when I was quite small.
It takes a lifetime to know your worth.
The first time I made money playing music, I was 12 years old because I started busking then at farmers markets. But I've been gigging and teaching guitar since I was 18 years old. My dad played guitar, and you could tell if he was home from work because you could hear the stereo from a block over. And so he'd play guitar, and my mom would sing. Let's put on this one. I've had this one since I was a kid. Good old Iggy. It's Iggy and the Stooges, produced by David Bowie, right? And someone was telling me that they have a version of it with less Bowie. Why would you want that? Give me the more Bowie version. My parents really taught me to listen to music like a movie, you know what I mean? In the evening, they'd put on records and CDs, and I could work a tape player and a record player at a stupid young age, like very small. My stereo was actually my parents' wedding gift, and I have had it my entire life. And I just have bookshelf speakers and I crank them. Yeah, I'm super sentimental about things, honestly. So I've always been an ear player first. I know how to read music and music theory, but that came later. I learned just by listening to records and trying to copy it. So if I have time during the day, I just put on a record and sit down with my guitar and play along as much as I can. In my basement, we have another stereo that we run through our recording system to check mixes and things like that to see how close we are in our music to these old sounds. So I'm gonna do this Shangri-La as leader of the pack. So I throw it on my record player here, and I'm gonna run it over to our studio. You know, I'm not seeking imperfection, but I'm okay with it, you know? I can go back and forth between my music, compare what I've been working on to this old mix. It's the way the music sounds, but also back then it was real music. Nowadays, you go into the studio and you play your note one time and they'll cut it 20 times. Whereas on old records, you can hear the humanness of it. The mistakes are in there, or things are loose when they need to be, or shifting for the emotion of the music, and it's more raw, and everything's not so clean and shiny and sterile. Try to see if we're occupying the same sonic space, and how the vocals are coming through, the levels between the guitars, drums, bass. Just trying to match their sound, I guess. You gotta take big risks to make something interesting or new, right? I'd rather be on the edge of my seat just about falling off. That's when some magical thing might happen. I might not ever be able to play it again, but it's exciting that way. And my whole life is like a time machine, so why wouldn't my music be, right? I don't think I'm necessarily the only person doing this, but it's kind of the opposite approach of what most people are trying to achieve in a home studio. We're purposely using tape and analog to get the tape and analog sound, whereas nowadays you can buy a little plug-in or like basically the same as an app, right? To fake put that sound on, but it's not the same. It doesn't actually achieve it. Because I write kind of old school, more nostalgic type songs too, so it wouldn't really make sense to have it all clean and modern sounding. I would much rather sound like the Shangri-Las than Christina Aguilera or something like that, because I think a lot of people sound like a really good singer, and nobody sounds like me.
You can tell just what they're thinking.
It's a hard thing to deal with, but that's what I'm working with.
When CD sales surpassed vinyl in the late 80s, the end of LPs was predicted. However, some listeners never turned away, clinging to a dwindling market and a format they loved.
When I first met my wife, the first thing I did was to go to her record rack and go, going through to see what she had. And I thought, oh my God, Hank Snow sings Jimmy Rogers. I've got to have this woman in my life. I'm officially a senior. The fact that, we're probably going to be in a circumstance where I don't have the space for all that music, collected hard media, vinyl, CDs, all that stuff like that. We don't have kids, so it's not like I'm leaving it to them. I'll go to Greg and I'll say, hey, Greg, maybe it's about time I sold the collection, You remember this?
Oh, Demore Jazz Fest.
But I'll tell you, it's hard. You start thinking about getting rid of some of the stuff, even things you haven't played in ages. You just look at the cover and all that nostalgia and memory and tactile environment and all that stuff. It comes back to me and it's just like, but this is my child.
Well, I jokingly used to attribute my longevity to two factors. One is stubbornness. The other is lack of creativity. What started to happen with the increase in vinyl sales, more and more of the sort of the mainstream artists, which is the easiest stuff to find when people are bringing it in, and then that was the key to our more current success. When vinyl came back, Into the Music was the first place they thought of, but it was very what I would call left-wing kind of thing, very jazz and blues collectors, punk rock collectors.
I tend to not be much of a mainstream listener. I mean, naturally, when you're younger, you're kind of into the loud sounds. But eventually, I was starting to get more into jazz and sort of experimental music and stuff.
It was kind of like part of the culture of going to basement shows. There was a lot of people there who were already record collectors. It's just like a community of people who want to like nerd out about talking records or talking music trivia. And a friend just took me to shop here. They were very into vinyl. I got into buying it more because at the time it was a lot cheaper than CD. And it seemed kind of like unquestionably better. After every payday, I'd like come home with like a big stack of records. It sounded better, like fuller and bassier, and I just fell in love with it.
I liken listening to vinyl to slow food. As opposed to you get fast food, get it delivered to your door, or you could make your shopping list, you could make a really good quality meal, take your time to enjoy it. That debate, analog versus digital, has been going since CDs first came onto the market. The common wisdom at the time was that everyone changed because of the sound. The truth is that people changed because of convenience.
Like, I have to sit with it a bit more. Even just like enjoying the art and like reading through liner notes, it demands more presence.
And people will say, well, it's a bit of a psychosis or it's a neurosis or something like that. Yes, in a way it is. You know, collecting and perhaps hoarding, if you got too much of something, is definitely falls into that category. But don't ask my wife about what we're going to do with the records because, you know, she's got answers that I don't like to hear sometimes.